Welcome to EPG Padashala. I am Professor Hariharan from the Institute of English, University of Kerala. The paper that we are looking at is 20th century English literature, and the module we will be looking at is the novel The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. Let us begin. We will begin by introducing Muriel Spark. Now, Muriel Spark is one of the greatest pioneers of modern fiction. Her work is characterized by humor. There is a humorous vein in what she writes. The major works of Muriel Spark include The Comforters, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Memento Mori, Loitering with Intent, and of course The Finishing School. Now, her themes are very much subjective. At the same time, her style is noted for their detachment. Now, this is what really is very interesting about Muriel Spark's writing. Now, a word about this novel. The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is hailed as a 20th century classic. Now, what I will do now is to read out one sentence to you about this novel. There is a rare charm that infuses her characters with real life poignancy. Now, this is something that we need to keep in mind when we read a novel like The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Let's look in some more detail at this novel. Now, this is the best known work of Muriel Spark, to the extent that Jean Brodie is almost seen as perhaps one of the most illustrious characters of 20th century or 20th century fiction. Now, the character of Brodie is partially inspired by Muriel Spark's own teacher, Christine Kay. Now, it's quite possible, therefore, to perhaps say that there is this little autobiographical element in this work. Now, we are not saying here, or we cannot say that this is an out and out autobiographical novel. What we are saying is that there is this character who is modeled on Muriel Spark's teacher. That's all. Now, what we need to remember is that it is perhaps this inspiration that adds to the artistic quality of the work. The novel underlines the fact that it is human passion that is the dominant motif in the novel. Let me repeat this. Human passion is the dominant motif in this novel. Now, we can take this book as a representative text or a representative novel that highlights the uniqueness of the narrative world that Spark created or was creating. Now, when we say that this is a representative novel, we will have to also try and understand the features or the qualities that seem to kind of recur in her works. Now, we had also talked about something about life in her novels. Now, we need to also bear in mind some of the concerns that, or some of the issues that we confront in everyday life. Now, what this novel does is to address or take up for discussion some of these concerns, or rather dichotomies in life, the opposites in life. Now, we cannot think of life without some of these opposites. Now, what are these opposites? Love. But then love is not the only thing. Love, and we have to think about betrayal, admiration and jealousy, revenge and regret. So we have identified, let's say, at least 3 binary pairs. Now, these are dichotomies that govern life definitely in this novel. Now, what we have to now do is to analyze, or what the novel does rather, is offer an analysis of the primal motives that prompt individual decisions. Now, what are the urges that are there? What are the thought processes that are there that compel us to decide on something? What makes us decide, take up a decision, or decide on something, a course of action? Now, what are the motives behind it? Now, these are things that the novel tries to address or even unravel. Let us go on from here. We will now look at the narrative style of the novel. This is, as we said earlier, one of the finest works of Muriel Spark, a very popular text. Now, what makes a text like this a text so popular? Obviously, much more than the story. I think we'll have to think about the way in which the story is told. And when we read a book, we always look for, we always search, we always try to find out who is telling the story. And here, in this novel, you have an omniscient narrator. An omniscient narrator, that is the all-knowing narrator, who probes into the internal mindscapes of the characters. An all-knowing narrator who looks at, tries to understand, probes, as it were, the way in which a character is thinking, the internal mindscape. Now, this is what we mean by the internal mindscape. Now, there can be different ways in which the omniscient narrator can function, and that depends on the writer. Now, here, the narrative voice is felt. Now, how do we feel the narrative voice? The narrative voice is present. It's a lurking presence. You know, you become aware of its presence. So, there is this lurking presence. You know that it is there. Now, at the same time, critics have argued, have said that, or they have commented on the kind of control that Muriel Spark has over her characters. Now, the moot question is whether this can be seen as authorial intrusion. But I think we need to just keep this in mind, that here is an author who exercises control over her characters. Now, there is this young girl in this novel, and her name is Sandy. Now, she, to use a technical term, she is the focalizer in many of the situations in the novel. focalizer is a term that is borrowed from narratology. We are familiar with the word focus, right? Something or someone who gives this focus, who kind of orients you to look at something. This would be a very, very basic understanding of the term focalizer. So Sandy is or becomes the focalizer in many of the situations in the novel. So we have started by looking at the narrative style. Now let us look at the other things that Muriel Spark employs in this narrative. There are two things that she uses here. Now these are two, I will introduce two technical terms and then tell you what they are. Now she uses, for example, analepsis and prolepsis. I'll tell you what they are. analepses, analepsis, and prolepsis, prolepses, prolepsis, analepsis and prolepsis. Now analepsis is something that we all are familiar with. It simply means flashback. Flashback is something that we all know. When we listen to a story, we would have to go forward and backward. Now flashback is going backward. That is analepsis. Now prolepsis is looking forward or flash forward, to look forward to. So you look back and then you look forward. Now Spark uses both these in this novel. So much of the you will have things, you will have people going back and then flash forward, going forward. And at the same time, narrative suspense is maintained in this novel. This is another technique that she employs. Now if you want to know how there is suspense maintained in this novel, I would urge you to read the book. Now there is deceit in this novel, and there is somebody who has done something which makes it difficult makes life difficult, let us say, which makes things difficult, uncomfortable for Miss Jean Brodie. Now it's not a whodunit. It's not a mystery where you will never know who the culprit really is till the end, because here the identity of the culprit is revealed quite early. And what is the crime? The crime is betrayal. So there is a betrayal, but then why is there this betrayal? Now you have, I was talking about this young girl Sandy. Now this motive for the betrayal is revealed only at the end of the narrative. The motive is presented to you only at the end of the narrative. Now the dramatic revelation that you have, that comes towards the end. Now this is what provides the climactic release in what would be otherwise a very relaxed kind of a narrative. Fine. So we have a dramatic revelation. Now this is what really makes the novel really, tells you something about Spark's art, or the way in which she takes the narrative forward. There is this, I think there is this release, as it were, where you know the reason for this betrayal. Otherwise it just flows, the narrative just flows like that, and then towards the end of it you have this very, very interesting revelation. Now so much for the outline of the narrative style. Now the place of narration remains almost even. It's there almost even. Now the narrative doesn't rush forward. There is no pulling backward. There is an ease with which the narrative flows. What kind of a narrative is this? We talked about flashbacks and flash forwards. Now look at this, what it would do. Look what it would do to a narrative. When you have this moving back and forth, it will contribute to a kind of non-linearity. Now, the non-linearity in this narrative sustains, maintains the momentum of the plot. Sandy, this young girl, tells a lot of things to herself. What you have is, you have Sandy's interior monologues. Now, Sandy's interior monologues can be seen as small narratives, mini narratives. Now, this is what highlights how she becomes, or she is, the primary focalizer. So, Sandy is the primary focalizer in this story. So that tells you something, that tells you something more about Sandy. Now, we have the internal monologue which is given to you, which is told, which is revealed to us. Now, if you look for meaning, when we read this book, we would realize that meaning is not a given here. What you have more than the givenness of things is an analysis of things. Right? It's an analysis of things. Now, meaning is not given, meaning is analyzed. So, you are expected to sit and then analyze things. Now, what we have been doing is, we have been trying to identify certain features. Now, we can perhaps say that these are techniques that you would find in a metafiction, in a narrative that is metafictive in intent. Now, once we identify this text as an example of metafiction, then we certainly recognize that there is a lot of intertextuality in this. So, intertextuality is another characteristic which we know of metafiction, and what such texts do is that they display a certain kind of self-reflexivity, right? A certain kind of self-reflexivity, where the text is very conscious of its existence, its mode of existence, right? Now, there are very many other terms that are used to talk about metafiction. I will list out maybe 3 or 4. These are terms that became popular in the late part of in the latter half of the 20th century. Surfiction, S-U-R, surfiction. Anti-fiction is another term that is used. Neo-Baroque fiction. We are familiar with realism, we are familiar with surrealism. Now, there is this other word to talk about this kind of narrative. It's called irrealism. These are all terms that are associated with metafiction. We will now look at this novel as an example of metafiction. Metafictional strategies are used in this novel. These strategies jolt the reader into an awareness of the text, that there is this text here. You are asked in a way to look at the text. Now, in this narrative, what Spark does is to show how authority, let us say, is constructed. Now, the constructedness of authority is evaluated using the figure of Mrs. or Miss Brodie. Now, Miss Brodie is a teacher, and a teacher naturally will have some control. Now, in this novel, what happens is that Miss Brodie's control is toppled. What you have here is a subversion of authorial control. Now, Miss Brodie is some kind of a symbolic author who fails in her endeavor to write the lives of her students. This is very interesting. Now, this tells you also a lot about the kind of control that a storyteller might want to exercise, might choose to exercise, perhaps is not able to exercise. It's almost like the storyteller trying to reveal the hands and still tell the story. It's a big risk that storytellers take when they try to do something like this. So here you have Miss Brodie, who is sort of some kind of a symbolic author who fails in her endeavor to write the students' lives. Now, I cannot write your lives. Well, you cannot write my life, right? So it asks certain very interesting questions about who we are and what we are and what makes us. Now, this is what we need to understand by the word constructedness. Authority we know is constructed. What is the authority that the teacher has? So these are questions that we need to be asking as we read a book like this. Sandy, we will look at this character, Sandy. Sandy is an errant character, right? A person who is not very obedient, let's say, an errant character, a young girl who revolts against authority, who revolts against a dominating author. Now, this resistant character creates a discourse that subverts Brodie's narrative. Now, what kind of a discourse is this? It's a liminal discourse. Liminal is, it's not there, it's not here, it's somewhere in between. It's on the edge, on the border. And that space is very fascinating because that's always, the liminal space is always happening space. Now, the author of the main narrative, that is Miss Brodie, becomes a helpless character in this counter narrative that we have, that Sandy comes up with, this liminal narrative. So you have the main narrative, the author who tells the main narrative, who gives you the main narrative, becoming helpless in the face of, as she confronts, as she has to come face to face with the counter narrative. Fine? So this is this is what really takes the narrative forward. Now let's look at the major themes and motifs in the novel. There are three major themes and motifs in the novel. What are they? Transfiguration is the first one, betrayal is the second one, and religion is the third one. Transfiguration, betrayal, and religion. Now we will take these one after the other. Let's look at these three elements. Transfiguration. Now, Miss Brodie would preach. She would sermonize on the ideal of transfiguration. But then, nothing happens with her. She remains the same. Sandy, on the other hand, undergoes transfiguration in the course of the narrative. Nothing happens to Miss Brodie. Right? We need to always practice what we preach. Now, the ideal of transfiguration that Miss Brodie preached, at least for her, remains static, remains a stagnant principle. It doesn't change because she just preaches it. The only person who undergoes this transfiguration in the course of the narrative, let me repeat, is only Sandy. Right? That's transfiguration. Let's see what more we will have to say. Sandy's transformation. What is it? What is the nature of this transformation? It is at the same time spiritual and it is emotional. Now, we need to think a little bit about this religious transformation. Now, was this religious transformation prompted did this religious transformation happen because of genuine faith? Now, this question is not addressed in a definitive manner, in the sense that you do not have a very clear answer to this question. Now, Sandy's blind idealism, for her, the ideal was her teacher. This idealism, this belief, this was blind. She blindly followed her teacher. Now, this blind idealism is transfigured now into an awareness. It's a very calculated awareness. It's a very calculated awareness. Whether can one use the word enlightenment here? I am not very sure. But then, let's say that Sandy is aware now. She is able to see, understand things, that she is able to reason out things. It's in this sense that one would use a word like calculated. Fine? So much about Sandy. We look at the next theme. We looked at transfiguration. Now let us look at betrayal. What about betrayal? Betrayal is a very old theme. In this novel, betrayal works at many levels. Now, we look at these different levels here. Miss Brodie, for example, betrays the emotional trust that students place in her. That is betrayal. That's one betrayal. What about the student Sandy? Sandy betrays Miss Brodie in her revenge, as she takes revenge. That's also betrayal. Now, why did Sandy betray Miss Brodie? Sandy betrays Miss Brodie because she believes that her teacher does not deserve the loyalty of her students. So, this is the reason why Sandy betrays her teacher, because she believes that Miss Brodie never deserved their loyalty. So this is betrayal. We will look at it more. We will look at it in some more detail. Sandy grows up looking up to her teacher. And what does she see? She sees her teacher, or she sees her teacher's casual betrayal. Now, betrayals are betrayals. Betrayals are betrayals. So, she sees her teacher betraying all along. Now, what is it that Sandy sees? Sandy sees that her teacher betrays her own self when she adheres to a false set of ideals. Right? She adheres to a false set of ideals. This is the way she betrays herself. Now, what are the consequences of betrayal? Sandy is affected by her own betrayal and ends up leading a cloistered life, an enclosed life, a life that she lives without getting in contact with others. This is cloistered life. So she leads that kind of a life. So much for betrayal. Let's look at the next theme, concern that we have, religion. Now, the central characters, they embrace religion in the later part of their life. Now, Miss Brodie, for example, is very much suspicious of Roman Catholicism. Look at Sandy. We had said earlier that she ends up living a cloistered life. Obviously, she has become a nun. She has become a Catholic nun. Before that, she was interested in another thinking, another way of looking at religion or looking at God, and that was Calvinism. I assume that I am sure that you all know what Calvinism is. Though for those who are not familiar with Calvinism, I urge you to Google in the name John Calvin. Religion is associated with conflicting ideologies, right? Because it's a matter of what you believe in. So if you believe in something, you perhaps do not believe in something else, and that's where the conflict comes. Now, Sandy's religious inclinations are all related to her identity politics. What am I? It springs from that question. Now, religion is a very crucial factor in molding Sandy's psyche. So, religion does play a very crucial role when we look at the character of Sandy, when we look at the psychological makeup of Sandy. So much for religion. Now, what we will do is we will try to attempt a conclusion, a summing up of the story. What we have done is we have indicated some of the major things that you can look up here. We have talked about metafiction, we have talked about religion, we have talked about self, we have talked about non-linearity of narratives, etc. Now let's try to sum up some of these things. What Spark does in this novel is to capture the slippery, the elusive nature of the human mind, and that is not an easy thing. In the process, what the novel does is to address a number of issues, a number of concerns about human nature. And what happens is, in the process, the notion of an absolute self or self-image is taken apart. And finally, ideological deception, the way in which we are deceived by belief systems, by faith, etc., all that is foregrounded, so that we are shown certain things. We are not told things, we are shown things. Now, this I would say is the stamp of the novel, and this is the reason perhaps why The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is read even today. Now, having said this, I'm sure you all would feel like reading this book. I hope you have a good time reading this book. Thank you.